The clang of hammer on metal echoed through the forge, a rhythmic sound that spoke of strength and precision. Ivy Marlowe lingered at the doorway, watching Calder Rhyne work. His back was to her, broad shoulders flexing beneath a sweat-dampened shirt, muscles shifting with every strike. The glow of molten iron lit his face in flickers, catching in the sharp angles of his jaw and the dark, untamed waves of his hair. He was intimidatingly beautiful in a way that made her pulse quicken, a man carved from fire and steel. "Are you just going to stand there, or do you need something?" His voice, low and rough, startled her. Ivy straightened, the flush on her cheeks deepening. "Sorry, I didn't mean to stare." Calder turned, setting his hammer aside. His amber eyes met hers, glowing faintly in the forge's light, though Ivy told herself it was a trick of the fire. "Most people do," he said, his tone unreadable. "But it doesn't make it any less irritating." The comment stung, but Ivy refused to let him see it. She stepped into the room, the heat wrapping around her like a second skin. "I came to discuss the ironwork for my grandmother's estate. Are you still interested in the job, or should I find someone else?" Calder studied her for a moment, his gaze lingering in a way that felt both searching and dismissive. "Depends on the job," he said finally. Ivy handed him the rolled-up sketches she'd been clutching. "It's a restoration project. I need railings, gates, things with detail. I've seen your work around town, and you're the best." He took the sketches, his calloused fingers brushing hers. The brief contact sent an unexpected spark through her, and she almost pulled back, startled by the sensation. If Calder noticed, he didn't show it. He unrolled the paper, his brow furrowing as he examined her designs. "Not bad," he muttered, his tone grudging. "You've got an eye for detail." "Thanks," she said, trying to ignore how her heart raced under his scrutiny. "So, will you do it?" Calder hesitated, his gaze flicking to her face. "I'll do it, but I don't like distractions. If you're one of those people who'll hover and micromanage, this won't work." "Noted," Ivy said, lifting her chin. "But don't expect me to stay away completely. This project matters to me." Something flickered in his eyes, admiration maybe, or annoyance. It was hard to tell. "Fair enough. We start tomorrow." He turned back to the forge, clearly dismissing her. But as Ivy made her way to the door, she glanced back, catching a final glimpse of Calder in the firelight. The way the flames danced around him felt almost unnatural, as if the fire wasn't something he feared, but something he controlled. She shook off the thought and left, unaware that Calder's gaze followed her until she was gone. Alone, Calder let out a breath. This woman, with her determination and her sharp eyes, was trouble. And trouble, he knew, had a way of igniting things best left cold. The tunnels beneath Emberfall were colder than Ivy expected, the damp air carrying the metallic tang of old iron and forgotten history. She adjusted the flashlight in her hand, its narrow beam slicing through the darkness and illuminating soot-streaked walls marked with strange, scorched symbols. The air seemed heavier here, charged with an energy she couldn't explain. Ivy crouched, running her fingers over one of the carvings. The jagged lines radiated faint heat, a warmth that sent a shiver up her spine. It was the same warmth she'd felt when Calder's hand had brushed hers the day before. Her thoughts drifted to him, his gruff demeanor, the restrained fire in his amber eyes, and the way he seemed to carry the weight of something far larger than himself. A faint scuffling sound echoed behind her. She froze, heart pounding, and swung the flashlight around. "Careful, you don't know what's down here," she yelped, the flashlight slipping from her grasp and clattering to the ground. Calder stepped into the circle of light, his face shadowed but unmistakable. "What are you doing here?" she asked, pressing a hand to her chest to steady her racing heart. "I could ask you the same," he said, his voice low and edged with irritation. He picked up the flashlight and handed it back to her. "These tunnels aren't safe. You shouldn't be wandering around alone." "I can handle myself," she shot back, bristling at his tone. Calder's gaze swept over her, unreadable but somehow piercing. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." She straightened, refusing to be intimidated. "Then maybe you should enlighten me. Because someone, maybe even you, left these scorch marks, and I want to know why." His jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he might leave. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the confined space. "Some things are better left buried, Ivy," he said, his voice softer now but no less intense. "And some things deserve to be uncovered," she countered, her breath catching as his eyes locked onto hers. The tension between them crackled, charged like the air in the tunnels. Calder's gaze dropped briefly to her lips, and her pulse quickened. She felt the heat radiating off him, not just the warmth of his body, but something deeper, more primal. "Ivy," he said, her name a low warning, but she didn't back away. Instead, she stepped closer, tilting her chin up. "What are you so afraid of, Calder?" His hand brushed her arm, sending a surge of heat through her. His restraint was palpable, the lines of his body taut as if holding back a force he couldn't control. "You don't understand," he said, voice rough. "Then help me understand," she whispered. For a moment the fire in his eyes flared, and she thought he might kiss her. But instead he pulled back, his expression shadowed. "Stay out of the tunnels," he said, his voice cold now. "For your own good." Before she could respond, he turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving her with more questions and a burning ache she couldn't ignore. The rhythmic clang of the hammer had always been Calder's solace, a steady beat that drowned out the chaos of his thoughts. But today, even the forge couldn't quiet his mind. Ivy Marlowe was everywhere, her defiant stare, the challenge in her voice, the way she stepped closer when she should have stepped away. "Damn it," he muttered, wiping sweat from his brow as the memory of her lingered like the heat from the forge. The sharp creak of the workshop door pulled him from his thoughts. He turned, half expecting another customer, but there she was, framed in the doorway, her hair catching the afternoon light like burnished copper. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Ivy said, her voice soft but laced with determination. "You're here," he replied flatly, though his pulse betrayed him, quickening at the sight of her. "So I guess you are." Ivy stepped inside, the warmth of the forge brushing over her skin. She hesitated for only a moment before holding out a small leather-bound book. "I found this while cleaning the estate. It's about old smithing techniques. Thought you might like it." Calder blinked, caught off guard. People didn't give him things, certainly not things that mattered. He took the book carefully, his rough hands brushing against hers. "Thanks," he said, the word gruff but genuine. Ivy lingered, her eyes drawn to the molten glow of the forge. "Do you ever stop working?" "Not if I can help it," he replied, placing the book on a nearby bench. Her gaze wandered over the intricate ironwork hanging around the room. "It's beautiful," she said softly, and something in her tone made Calder glance at her. "Most people just see metal," he said. "I see you," she said before she could stop herself. The words hung in the air, and Calder's breath caught. He hadn't expected her to say that. Hell, he didn't even know how to respond. But Ivy wasn't backing down, her eyes locked on his, filled with something that looked a lot like understanding. "Ivy." He stepped closer, his hand brushing hers where it rested on the edge of his workbench. The touch was deliberate this time, testing, but no less electric. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You should be," he said, though his voice cracked at the edges. But Ivy didn't move away. She tilted her chin up, challenging him in that way that both infuriated and drew him. "Why? Because you've got secrets? So do I." You don't scare me, Calder. You intrigue me. He couldn't stop himself this time. The tension snapped, and he closed the space between them, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was hot and demanding. Her fingers tangled in his shirt, pulling him closer, and for a moment, the world outside the forge didn't exist. But then, just as quickly as it began, Calder broke away, his breathing ragged. "This can't happen," he said, his voice filled with torment. Ivy searched his face, her chest rising and falling as if she'd been running. "Why not?" "Because I'm not what you think I am," he said, his amber eyes dark with something she couldn't name. "Then show me," she said, her voice steady. Calder stared at her, the war inside him written in every tense line of his body. But instead of answering, he turned back to the forge, his hands gripping the edge of the workbench like it was the only thing holding him together. "Ivy, you need to go," he said, his tone final. But as she left, one thing was clear to both of them. This fire had already been lit, and it was only a matter of time before it consumed them both. The estate loomed in the moonlight, its crumbling edges softened by the silvery glow. Ivy stood on the veranda, her arms crossed as she gazed out over the darkened hills. She'd spent the evening poring over her sketches, but her mind kept circling back to Calder. Every interaction with him left her feeling scorched, like he'd seared himself into her thoughts. The way his lips had felt against hers in the forge haunted her, and the storm of emotions in his amber eyes was impossible to forget. A faint sound behind her broke her reverie, and she turned to find Calder stepping out of the shadows. His presence was as startling as ever, broad shoulders draped in a dark jacket, his expression tense, like he was carrying the weight of the world. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, his voice low and rough. Ivy lifted an eyebrow, crossing her arms. "Why do you keep saying that? What exactly am I supposed to be afraid of, Calder?" He didn't answer right away, his jaw tightening as he looked past her, into the darkness beyond the estate. "You're not safe. Not here. Not with me." "Stop saying that," Ivy said, stepping closer. "You keep pushing me away, but you're the one who keeps showing up. So either you want me gone or you don't. Which is it?" Calder's gaze snapped to hers, and for a moment his control faltered. "You don't understand what I am," he said, his voice raw. "What I've done." "Then make me understand," she said, her heart pounding. "Because I'm not going anywhere." For a long moment, Calder just looked at her, the war inside him visible in every line of his face. Then, with a sharp exhale, he stepped back and pulled off his jacket, tossing it aside. "Fine," he said, his voice low and rough. "But don't say I didn't warn you." Before she could respond, his hands ignited. Flames burst to life, climbing up his arms, casting an otherworldly glow over his skin. The fire didn't consume him. It danced along his body like it belonged to him. Ivy's breath hitched, her eyes wide as she took a step back. But it wasn't fear she felt. It was awe. The fire illuminated every plane of his face, every tension in his body, and the vulnerability in his eyes. "This is what I am," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "I'm a phoenix shifter, born from fire, reborn by it." Ivy stared at him, her pulse pounding. "And you thought this would scare me?" Calder blinked, the fire dimming slightly. "It should. People like me, we destroy everything we touch." She stepped forward, close enough to feel the heat radiating from him. "I don't believe that," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "You think you're the fire, Calder, but you're also the one who shapes it. You're not a monster." His throat worked as he looked at her, the tension in his jaw softening. "You're too close," he whispered. "Maybe," she replied, reaching up to touch his face, the warmth of his skin under her fingertips sending a jolt through her. "But I don't care." The kiss that followed wasn't slow or tentative. It was urgent, searing, like the flames he carried inside him. Calder's arms wrapped around her, pulling her closer, and she felt his fire, not just the heat, but the power, the intensity, the raw need he'd been holding back. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. Calder rested his forehead against hers, his hands still blazing faintly. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into," he said, his voice tinged with both warning and wonder. Ivy smiled, her fingers tracing the edge of his jaw. "Maybe not," she said softly, "but I think I'll take my chances." And for the first time, Calder allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she could. The forge was alive with heat and light, the air thick with the scent of molten metal and embers. Ivy stood near the workbench, her heart hammering as she watched Calder move. His movements were precise and almost hypnotic, the fire on his skin flaring in sync with the forge's glow. She still hadn't entirely processed the truth of what he was. A phoenix shifter, a being of fire and rebirth. But her feelings for him burned brighter than her fear of the unknown. "How long are you going to stand there and stare?" Calder's voice cut through the rhythmic pounding of the hammer. He didn't turn, but she could see the faint curve of a smirk on his lips. Ivy rolled her eyes, though her cheeks flushed. "I'm waiting for you to explain what's happening, Calder. You brought me here, remember?" His smirk faded as he turned to face her, the intensity in his amber eyes making her stomach flip. "The rogue faction isn't going to stop," he said, his voice low but steady. "They've already started fires around town to draw me out. They'll escalate until they get what they want. Me." "Why you?" Ivy asked, stepping closer. Calder hesitated, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "Because I'm a phoenix. My flames are stronger than anything they have. If they can control me, they can burn this entire town, and anyone who stands against them, to the ground." A chill ran down Ivy's spine, but she refused to show fear. "So what's the plan?" Calder's gaze softened, his fire dimming slightly as he stepped closer. "The plan is to keep you safe," he said, his voice gentler now. She shook her head, her hands balling into fists. "No, I'm not hiding while you fight alone. I can help." "Ivy, no," she interrupted, her voice fierce. "I'm not leaving you to face this by yourself. You said the rogue shifters are using the tunnels, right? I know those tunnels. I've been mapping them since I got back. We can use them to our advantage." Calder stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, to her surprise, he let out a soft laugh, low and rough, like the crackle of a distant fire. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met," he said, shaking his head. "And you're the most infuriating man," she shot back, though her lips twitched into a smile. The tension between them shifted, the air crackling with something heavier, hotter. Calder's gaze dipped to her lips, and before she could say another word, he closed the distance between them. The kiss was fiery, consuming, as though every barrier between them had finally burned away. His hands gripped her waist, pulling her flush against him, and Ivy tangled her fingers in his hair, feeling the heat of his flames against her skin. It was a kiss that spoke of desperation and hope, of a bond forged in the firestorm brewing around them. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. Calder rested his forehead against hers, his hands still lingering on her hips. "You drive me insane," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Good," she whispered, her fingers brushing his cheek. "Now, let's figure out how to win this." Calder's eyes flared with renewed determination. "There's an old forge hidden deep in the tunnels," he said. "It's a phoenix forge, something my kind used centuries ago to focus our power. If I can reach it, I might be able to turn the tide." "Then we'll find it," Ivy said firmly, her fingers tightening on his arm. "Together." For the first time, Calder allowed himself to believe they might actually stand a chance. With Ivy at his side, he felt something he hadn't in centuries: hope. But as the glow of the forge illuminated her face, a flicker of unease stirred within him. The rogue shifters wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted, and Calder knew all too well what it meant to lose everything to fire. He only hoped this time he could keep the flames from consuming the one person who made him feel alive again. The tunnels seemed endless, twisting like veins beneath Emberfall, each step taking Ivy and Calder deeper into the earth. The air was thick and warm, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Ivy kept pace beside Calder, their path lit by the faint glow of his fire. She couldn't help but notice the tension in his frame, his muscles coiled tight as though expecting an attack at any moment. "How close are we?" Ivy asked, her voice soft but steady. Calder didn't look at her. "Close. I can feel it. The forge is ahead." Ivy reached out, brushing her fingers against his arm. He paused, glancing at her, the amber glow in his eyes flickering with something raw. "We'll make it," she said, her voice firm. His gaze softened, but only for a moment. "Stay close to me, no matter what happens." They continued in silence until the tunnel opened into a massive chamber. The Phoenix Forge stood at its center, an ancient structure of blackened stone and metal, radiating an otherworldly heat. The air shimmered with the promise of power, but Ivy barely had a moment to take it in before a low growl echoed through the space. "They're here," Calder muttered. The rogue shifters emerged from the shadows, their eyes gleaming with predatory intent. At their head was a man with an aura of menace, his voice echoing as he spoke. "Calder Rhyne, the phoenix who hides among humans. It's time you stopped running and joined your kind." Calder stepped in front of Ivy, his flames flaring. "I'll never be part of your destruction." The rogue leader laughed. "You don't have a choice." With a motion of his hand, the shifters attacked. Chaos erupted as flames and shadows clashed. Calder unleashed his fire, the chamber illuminating like the heart of a volcano. Ivy ducked behind a pillar, her heart pounding as she tried to make sense of the battle. One of the shifters broke away, lunging toward her. Ivy grabbed a metal rod from the ground and swung, catching him off guard. She darted back, her mind racing. She couldn't fight like Calder, but she could think. "Calder!" she shouted over the roar of flames. "The forge! Use it!" Calder glanced at her, understanding flashing in his eyes. With a roar, he drove his flames into the forge. The ancient structure came alive, its metal glowing white-hot as power surged through the chamber. The shifters faltered, their own fire dimming in the presence of Calder's unleashed strength. But the power took its toll. Calder dropped to one knee, his flames flickering dangerously low. Ivy ran to him, her hands trembling as she touched his face. "Stay with me," she pleaded. "I'm fine," he rasped, though his body betrayed his words. The rogue leader advanced, desperation twisting his features. Ivy stood, placing herself between Calder and the man. "You'll have to go through me," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. Before the leader could strike, Calder rose, his flames surging anew. With a roar, he unleashed a final wave of fire, engulfing the leader and driving the remaining shifters into retreat. The chamber fell silent, the air thick with heat and ash. Ivy turned to Calder, who swayed on his feet. She caught him before he could fall, her arms wrapping around him tightly. "You did it," she whispered. Calder's eyes met hers, the fire in them dim but warm. "We did it." As they made their way back through the tunnels, the forge's light fading behind them, Ivy leaned into Calder's side. She knew their lives wouldn't be easy. There were still secrets to uncover, dangers to face, but she also knew they'd face them together. Because love, like fire, was strongest when forged in the fiercest of flames. The end.
Thank you so much for watching. All my stories are written by me, and I hope you enjoy them. I upload new videos daily, so I hope you'll hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. I'd also love to hear what you think about this story in the comments, and feel free to tell me what kinds of stories you'd like me to bring to the channel in the future.